You gave everything. Every ounce of your quiet loyalty poured into a fire you thought would warm your bones, but it burned you instead. The truth you didn't want to face is this: loyalty isn't a shield. It's not armor against betrayal, nor is it an invitation to be chosen. You stood there steady, hands open, willing to carry her weight, hold her silence, match her rhythm. But she moved to a different song, one where your echoes didn't follow. You weren't overlooked because you weren't enough. You were invisible because your devotion was never the prize she sought. It's a savage truth to swallow when every fiber of your honor demands you expect return, respect, recognition. But faithfulness, real faithfulness, is not a currency you cash in for love or loyalty in return. Sometimes it's a knife you hold in your own hand, cutting ties to what no longer serves you. You bowed to sincerity, and she danced in shadow. You believed presence meant belonging, but presence is just a footprint that the tide erases. At night, when the world is still, you feel that ache. The silent question of why standing firm was met only by absence. But there's power in that silence. In the space where loyalty failed, you find a blade sharpened by fire and loss. It's not about being chosen. It's about choosing yourself enough to walk away without a single apology. The men who taught you this never promised comfort. They promised clarity. And right now, clarity says you don't owe anyone your allegiance, especially if it's not returned. You carry your scars like armor, not to show the world how much you've bled, but to prove how unbreakable you've become. Loyalty is not a coin to spend. It's a standard you raise, a steel bar you lift alone. You are not less for being left behind. You are forged stronger by every door that closed in your face. This isn't a story about losing her. It's the quiet victory of reclaiming your own honor, one breath at a time, in a world where so many promises fall silent. You walked through hell and never raised your voice. That's your sword now. You were told to open up, to bare your soul like it was armor, to let them see the man inside, the raw, the real. But what did that get you? Silence. Not the kind of silence that commands respect, but the empty, cold silence that swallows every word you bled out. You showed loyalty like a wolf does, steady, unwavering, yet it became the shadow that made you invisible. Why does loyalty make us invisible? You delivered your truth beneath the moon's indifferent gaze, expecting a fire in return, but you got only the hollow echoes of neglect. It doesn't matter how open you are if your vulnerability is met with dismissal, like a blade sharpened not to cut walls but to wound the very hands that offer it. Modern manhood teaches you that emotional transparency is strength, that to speak is to lead. Yet respect slips through your fingers, a ghost walking alongside you in every room you once filled with your voice. You ask yourself if the man who stands with exposed ribs, heart on display, is the man who gets to be seen, or just the one who's been drained dry and left to fade. Is emotional availability just an open wound? When did bearing your soul become the same as losing it? You've poured yourself out in the hopes that someone would build from what you gave. Built trust, built connection, but the soil stayed barren. You gave constancy where chaos was welcomed. You planted roots in shifting sand. You stood firm in a wind designed to uproot you, bending where you should have broken. And now the storm is over. Step back and ask yourself, not the world, not those who ignore you. Ask your own reflection whether respect was ever meant to walk hand in hand with the vulnerability you were sold. Perhaps the truth is harsher. The wound you show isn't what earns you honor. It's the steel beneath the skin, the silence between your words, the discipline in your pause, the distance you keep when the world tries to pull you under a tide of unearned expectations. You gave everything, only to be met with absence. That absence isn't a failure on your part. It's a lesson etched in cold steel. The man who moves through this understands that visibility isn't granted by openness alone, but by the quiet reclamation of his own power, away from the hunger for approval. You walked the narrow path between heartbreak and indifference, and here's what you learn. To be seen is not always to be known. There is a quiet war raging inside you, the battle of loyalty against invisibility, and the prize is the clarity to hold your ground, not through more words, but through unwavering presence. This is your reckoning. Vulnerability may expose the wound, but respect is earned in the distance you carve with your own hands. The truth nobody warns you about is this. Pain doesn't care about your story, your hopes, or the quiet screams you swallow every night. It's indifferent. But that's exactly why it's the only real teacher you get. You're not a leaf caught in a storm, spinning helplessly with every gust of disappointment or loss. You are the storm-tested oak, roots pushed deep into cold, unyielding soil, unable to be toppled no matter how brutal the gale. I've seen a friend like this, once desperate, caught in the endless chase for someone else's approval, running laps on a treadmill set to validation. His life was noise, frantic and exhausting, trying to fit into shapes carved by others, forever reaching for a nod that never fully landed. Then one day, he stopped. Not because he suddenly found motivation, but because the exhaustion burned out the chase itself. He stood still in the quiet, detached from the desperate yearning to be seen on their terms. What happened next wasn't easy, but it was real. Clarity, like a cold northern star, cut through the fog of his frantic mind. Detachment didn't mean numbness, it meant freedom. The weight lifted from shoulders that had carried the chains of expectation their entire lives. Marcus Aurelius said it clear. The only thing truly ours is the ability to accept what life throws without crumbling. That acceptance is not surrender, it's fortitude. Physical strength fades with sweat and time, but standing firm amid the storms inside, that's the kingdom of the soul, and it doesn't rust. Transformation never blooms in comfort. It takes the harsh soil of trials, rejection, disrespect, loss, to crack open the seed of what you really are. In those silent moments, when doubt threatens to gnaw through your resolve, that's when you must forge a path as hard as tempered steel. Cut away the hinges that keep you prisoner to the low expectations of a world that doesn't get you. Carry the scars like badges. Every one carved wisdom into your flesh, every scar a lesson in how to stand taller than before. This journey from pain to wisdom isn't for the faint-hearted. It's for the warriors who choose to be unshaken, the men who no longer drift on tides set by others. You are the unyielding rock, constant, sure, anchored deep in the value you carry inside, no longer chasing approval but commanding your own respect. You don't get to choose the storm, but you get to decide if you'll break or if you'll stand like the oak, unyielding, sovereign, eternal. Detachment is the armor you forge when your mind wages war against itself. It's not walking away indifferent. It's standing steady in a world screaming for your reaction. You don't owe the chaos your spirit. When you detach from approval, from the invisible shackles of other people's judgments, you break the chains around your peace. You learn to watch the storm unfold through cold iron eyes, calm and unshaken. This clarity, born from a silence detached from personal attachment, is what claws you free from the trap of emotional noise. It's not about shutting down. It's about knowing what deserves your fire and what only wastes your breath. The world wants to pull you into its fight, but a detached mind chooses the battleground, and that choice is freedom. Emotional control is the silent guardian standing between you and a reckless heart. This isn't about burying your feelings or forcing a hard shell over your soul. It's the mastery of response, the steel hinge on a weathered door. When the wind howls and the world throws punches, your heart becomes the eye of the storm. Still, unmoving, peaceful enough to carry chaos around you without letting it sink its teeth in. Every instinct to lash out or crumble burns out against this calm. It's not weakness, it's discipline. Like the wolf that watches and waits, not because it fears, but because it knows the right moment to strike or to turn away. The men who lose this control lose themselves, swallowed whole by momentary fury. You hold this line. You remain. Mission first. This is the crucible where purpose becomes unbreakable. Without it, you're a ship lost in the fog, drifting on the whims of distraction and whimsy. But when your life is tethered to a raw, singular vision, everything else becomes background noise, narrow and pointless. This focus sculpts your resolve, cutting through the clutter and the shallow undertows that try to pull your spirit under. Mission first means rallying every ounce of your will under a banner that cannot be burned. It's relentless progression, moving forward not because of motivation, it will fail you, but because the mission demands it. Your eyes are fixed on the horizon, your steps unshaken by the tempests of distraction. This is how a man carves himself out of chaos. Integrity is your silent declaration to the world and yourself, unyielding even when no one watches. It isn't a showpiece you shine when the light is on, but a constant, an internal compass that whispers truth in the dark. When the easier path calls with its siren song, you stand firm. No shortcuts. The values you live by are steel in your blood, forged in fire so hot they don't bend for greed, fear, or convenience. Integrity means knowing who you are beneath the noise, beneath the masks. When temptation scratches at your gate, you don't flinch. You don't barter your soul. This is not for applause. It's for the peace that comes when you can look in the mirror without betraying your own eyes. Self-reliance is the bedrock under your feet when the world threatens to collapse. It's knowing with absolute certainty that everything you need exists inside. Your strength, your judgment, your survival. Dependence is a crutch, a shadow cast by doubt, a weight you don't have to carry. Men who build on others' foundations often wake in cold sweat when those supports vanish. Self-reliance means you stand unshaken, rooted deep in self-trust, able to withstand any storm alone. It's a fortress no one else can breach. You become your own army, your own supply line, your own sanctuary. This is the warrior's path, unfaltering, untouchable. You walk through hell and never raised your voice. That is your code. You've walked through fire that would have broken most men, carried weight on your shoulders that no one saw, and when the night pressed in with all its quiet cruelty, you didn't wrench out noise or desperation. You became something new, a force not shaped by what was done to you, but by the cold, deliberate choices you made in the wreckage. This isn't survival. This is ascendance. You no longer answer to the storms that once threatened to drown you, but you move through the world like continents beneath ice sheets, massive, unshakable, changing with slow, sure power. The wounds you carry have lost their voice. They are shadows fading into black. Where others saw a broken man, now there is a man who chooses. Not to be chosen, not to be liked or understood, but to act with the clarity of steel on stone, cutting his own path. This identity you wear is not a mask. It is your armor, forged in the silence after every battle you fought alone. Your control is quiet but absolute. In the stillness between heartbeats, you gather strength. You are no longer waiting for permission or seeking approval. You exist to define your own terms, to move like a wolf who hunts in shadow, focused, relentless, unbothered by the noise of the pack. You have stepped beyond the edge of pain, beyond the fracture of loss, and now you thrive not because life was fair, but because you refuse to be less than you are in the face of it. The world might never see the battles you held inside, but that doesn't matter. Your power is private, and it is real. You stand in control and silence is your strength. I don't explain, I elevate.